The night exploded with metal twisting against metal, headlights flaring like dying stars, and screams cutting through the smoke. A young woman's voice cracked in terror, trapped inside the mangled wreck of her car. Tires hissed, flames threatened, and bystanders froze in shock. But one man didn't. Daniel Carter, a 37-year-old single dad, ripped open the door with his bare hands, his 10-year-old son screaming behind him, "Dad, don't!" Daniel dove into the wreckage, cradled the woman against his chest, and carried her out as the car shuddered on the edge of explosion. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more videos like this. Let's begin. The stench of gasoline clung to Daniel's clothes as he staggered back, clutching the unconscious woman in his arms. Her long brown hair was matted with blood, her breath shallow, lips trembling. He laid her on the cold pavement, stripped off his jacket, and pressed it against her wounds. His son Tyler, just 10 years old, knelt beside him, his small hands shaking as he whispered, "Dad, is she going to die?" "No," Daniel growled, his voice raw but steady. "Not while I'm here." Sirens wailed in the distance, but time stretched painfully slow. Daniel's chest heaved as he held her hand, murmuring words of comfort she probably couldn't hear. He didn't know her name, didn't know why she'd been out on that dark country road. But he knew one thing: no one should die alone. The ambulance finally roared in, paramedics rushing. They shoved Daniel back, but he refused to let go until the gurney was ready. One of them, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, paused and said quietly, "You saved her life tonight." Daniel didn't answer. He just looked at Tyler, who was staring at the blood on his father's hands. Later that night, after they returned to their small rented house, Tyler wrapped his little arms around his dad and whispered, "You're a hero." Daniel kissed the top of his son's head and said, "I'm just a man doing what's right." He didn't expect to hear about the woman again, but fate doesn't let go so easily. The next morning, Daniel woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the kitchen window. His arms ached, his shirt from last night still stained with soot and blood. Tyler sat at the table, kicking his legs beneath the chair as he munched on a bowl of cereal, his eyes darting to his dad every few seconds. "Dad," Tyler said softly, "do you think she's okay?" Daniel took a sip of lukewarm coffee and stared into the steam. "I hope so, kiddo." His voice was heavy, weighed down by the reality he'd been living for years, working 2 jobs, juggling bills, doing everything alone. Saving strangers wasn't part of his plan. But sometimes life forced your hand. By noon, the news was everywhere. Local single-father pulls woman from fiery crash. Grainy cell phone footage captured him carrying her out of the wreck, his face streaked with smoke, his son crying in the background. The comments online painted him as a hero. Daniel didn't care. He hadn't done it for praise. 2 days later, while he was under the hood of an old pickup at the small auto shop where he worked, a shadow fell across the garage floor. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag and glanced up. It was her. She stood hesitantly, her arm in a sling, bandages wrapping her forehead. The bruises didn't dim the piercing light in her green eyes. She looked fragile but determined, like someone who'd stared death in the face and refused to bow. "You're the man who pulled me out," she said softly. Her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from something deeper, an emotion she hadn't quite put into words. Daniel nodded, brushing the grease from his hands. "I guess I am. How are you holding up?" "I'd be dead if not for you." She took a step forward, trembling slightly. "I don't even know your name." "Daniel Carter." he replied. He glanced back at Tyler, who was sitting on a stool drawing in his notebook, oblivious to the weight of the moment. And that's my boy, Tyler. Her lips curved into a faint smile. Emily, she said. Emily Rhodes. The name didn't mean anything to him, just another stranger. But the gratitude in her eyes shook him. She reached into her purse, pulling out an envelope. I came here because, well, I can't thank you enough. I don't have words. So please, at least take this. Daniel held up a hand, his jaw tightening. No. Emily blinked, caught off guard. What? I didn't drag you out of that wreck for a reward, Daniel said firmly. Keep your money. Her eyes glistened. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Instead, she tucked the envelope back into her purse and whispered, Then maybe let me thank you another way. Over the next few days, Emily returned. Sometimes she brought food, sometimes she just sat in the shop and watched Daniel work, talking with Tyler about dinosaurs and superheroes. Daniel tried to keep a wall up, but every laugh from Emily chipped at it. She was more than a woman he'd saved. She was someone searching for meaning after a brush with death. And somehow, she found herself drawn to the man who refused to see himself as anything more than ordinary. But not everyone saw it that way. On the fourth evening, while Daniel was cleaning tools, Tyler came running in. Dad, someone's at the door. Daniel wiped his hands and stepped outside. A black limousine idled in front of his modest home, its polished surface reflecting the dim glow of the streetlight. The rear door opened, and out stepped a tall man in a tailored suit, his silver hair glinting, his expression like carved stone. Emily stood beside him, her eyes full of worry. The man's gaze locked on Daniel. And in that instant, Daniel knew exactly who he was. Not just any man, not just Emily's family. He radiated power, wealth, control, the kind of presence that made others shrink. I'm Richard Rhodes, the man said, his voice sharp, commanding. You carried my daughter out of that wreck. Daniel straightened, meeting his eyes without flinching. That's right. Richard studied him in silence, then glanced at the humble house behind him, the old tools scattered near the garage, the boy peeking nervously from the doorway. My daughter tells me you refused her money. That intrigues me. Emily whispered, Dad, please. But Richard raised a hand, silencing her. Do you know who I am, Mr. Carter? Daniel shook his head. Doesn't matter. Richard's lips twitched into something between a smirk and a frown. I'm a billionaire. My daughter is the sole heir to my empire. And you. He gestured toward Daniel's oil-stained shirt. You're a mechanic raising a boy in a rented house. Daniel felt the sting of the words, but refused to let them cut deep. Titles don't mean much when a car's about to explode, he said calmly. For the first time, Richard's expression cracked, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. He stepped closer, his voice dropping low. Men like you don't just walk away. You want something. Tell me what it is. Daniel shook his head. I wanted your daughter to live, that's all. Emily's hand trembled at her side. She stepped between them, her eyes locking with her father's. Dad, he saved me because it was right, not because of who I am. Can't you see that? Richard's jaw clenched. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the hum of the limousine's engine. Finally, he turned back to Daniel, his voice carrying the weight of command. You're either the most foolish man I've ever met, or the only honest one. He paused, his gaze flicking toward Tyler. But mark my words, Carter. Saving my daughter ties you to this family in ways you can't begin to imagine. With that, Richard Rhodes climbed back into the limousine. Emily lingered, her eyes pleading with Daniel, as though she wanted to say something more but couldn't. The car doors shut, and the vehicle rolled away into the night, leaving Daniel standing in the quiet street with his son clutching his hand. Tyler looked up at him with wide eyes. "Dad, what just happened?" Daniel exhaled slowly, staring into the darkness. "Something tells me, kiddo. Our lives just got a lot more complicated." The days that followed felt different. Daniel noticed it in the way neighbors looked at him, how whispers carried when he walked into the grocery store. The viral footage of the crash had reached news outlets across the state. And while Daniel hated the attention, Emily's presence complicated things even more. She came back to the shop often. Sometimes she'd sit on an overturned bucket, with a coffee in her hand, watching him work. Other times, she'd help Tyler with homework while Daniel tuned up an engine. Slowly, the sound of her laughter stitched itself into the quiet spaces of their lives. But Daniel knew better than to mistake kindness for permanence. He had lived too many years learning that good things had a way of vanishing. And Richard Rhodes's warning echoed in his head every night. "Saving my daughter ties you to this family in ways you can't begin to imagine." One Friday afternoon, just as Daniel was locking up the shop, the black limousine returned. Daniel's stomach tightened. This time, Richard stepped out alone. He was dressed in a charcoal suit, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement as he approached. "Mr. Carter," Richard said. His tone clipped, his gaze sweeping the cluttered garage like a man inspecting a battlefield. "We need to talk." Daniel folded his arms. "If it's about money, it's not." Richard's interruption was sharp. "You've made it clear you won't take handouts. Fine, I respect that. But I need to know something. Are your intentions toward my daughter honorable?" Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "Intentions?" Richard's jaw tightened. "Emily is fragile right now, vulnerable. People like you," he gestured at Daniel's grease-stained shirt and worn boots, "tend to see opportunity where there should be none." Anger surged in Daniel's chest, but he kept his voice steady. "Listen, I didn't pull Emily out of that car because I wanted something from her. I didn't ask her to come back here. She chose that. Maybe instead of questioning me, you should ask yourself why your daughter feels safer in a mechanic's garage than in your mansion." The words landed like a hammer. Richard's face darkened, but he said nothing. After a long silence, he turned toward the limousine, pausing with his hand on the door. "You may think you're a good man, Carter, but mark me. If you hurt her, I'll bury you under the weight of everything I own." With that, he slid into the car and was gone, leaving Daniel standing in the cold dusk with his fists clenched. That night, Emily came by the house with takeout bags, her arms still in a sling. Tyler beamed when he saw her, running to help carry the food inside. For a moment, Daniel almost forgot the storm circling around them. They sat around the table, eating Chinese food from paper boxes, laughing at Tyler's stories about school. But Daniel's mind kept replaying Richard's words. He caught himself staring at Emily a little too long, his chest tightening with emotions he wasn't ready to name. When she noticed, she set down her chopsticks and asked softly, "What is it?" Daniel shook his head. "Nothing, just tired." But Emily wasn't fooled. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand. "My father doesn't understand you. He never will. He thinks everyone has a price." Daniel pulled back slightly, guilt washing over him. "Emily, you don't belong in my world. I'm a single dad trying to scrape by. You come from a family with everything." She leaned forward, her voice low but fierce. "And yet, when I was trapped in that car, it wasn't my father's money that saved me. It was you. You're the only reason I'm here right now. Doesn't that mean something?" The intensity in her eyes left Daniel speechless. He wanted to tell her yes. It meant everything. But fear held him back. He'd been burned before, abandoned by people who promised forever. He couldn't let Tyler get attached to someone who might vanish the next day. The next week, Richard's warning proved more than words. Daniel received a call from his boss at the auto shop. "Carter, I don't know what you did, but I can't keep you on anymore. A client threatened to pull every contract unless I let you go. I'm sorry, man. My hands are tied." Daniel stood in stunned silence, the phone cold against his ear. He didn't need to ask who the client was. Richard Rhodes had made his move. That night, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands. Bills already piled up like a mountain, and now he had no steady paycheck. Tyler peeked out from his bedroom, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. "Dad, are we going to be okay?" Daniel forced a smile, though his chest ached. "We'll be fine, buddy. I'll figure something out." But as the words left his mouth, doubt gnawed at him. 2 days later, Emily stormed into the shop, fire blazing in her eyes. "He fired you, didn't he?" Daniel sighed, wiping his hands on a rag. "It doesn't matter. I'll manage." "No," she snapped. "It does matter. My father thinks he can control everything, me, you, even your future. But he's wrong." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, Daniel saw the weight she carried. Being Richard Rhodes' daughter wasn't a privilege. It was a cage. He reached out, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. "Emily, you don't have to fight my battles. I've been standing on my own 2 feet for a long time." Her eyes welled with tears. "But maybe you don't have to anymore." Before Daniel could respond, headlights swept across the garage. The limousine rolled to a stop outside. Richard stepped out, flanked by 2 men in dark coats. His gaze locked on Daniel, cold and unyielding. Emily's breath hitched. "Dad, please." Richard raised a hand. "Enough, Emily." He turned to Daniel, his voice cutting like steel. "You want to prove you're more than just a mechanic? Then prove it. Come with me tomorrow. I have a test for you. Pass it, and I'll leave you alone. Fail, and you'll never see my daughter again." Daniel's jaw clenched, his heart pounding. He wanted to tell the man to go to hell. But then he glanced at Emily, her face pale, her eyes pleading, and at Tyler, who stood in the doorway, watching with fear. He exhaled slowly. "Fine," he said. "I'll take your test." Richard's lips curled into a thin smile. "Good. Then let's see what kind of man you really are." The limousine pulled away, leaving silence in its wake. Emily's hand trembled as she reached for Daniel's. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. Daniel looked at her, then at his son. "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." Because for the first time in years, he realized he wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting for something more. For love, for respect, for the chance to prove that a man's worth wasn't measured by the size of his bank account, but by the strength of his heart. And tomorrow, Richard Rhodes would learn exactly what kind of man Daniel Carter was.